The name is Jesus, only Jesus. Oh, only Jesus. Only Jesus.
Welcome back to Faithful Chats. Today, we're diving into one of Jesus' most countercultural teachings, eye for eye, from Matthew chapter 5, verses 38 to 42. In this passage, Jesus challenges the idea of justice as retaliation and invites us into a life of radical grace.
Right. Jesus begins with, "You have heard that it was said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth."
This phrase comes straight from the Old Testament, found in Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy. It's known as the law of retribution, or lex talionis. The idea was to limit revenge and ensure punishment matched the offense.
Exactly. If someone knocked out your tooth, you couldn't demand their entire life in return. It was about fairness and preventing escalating cycles of violence.
But Jesus turns this principle on its head. He says, "But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also."
Whoa. That's a tough one. A slap on the right cheek in that culture wasn't just physical, it was also a deep insult, a way to publicly shame someone.
And turning the other cheek isn't about being passive or weak. It's about refusing to retaliate, breaking the cycle of violence, and choosing a different path.
Jesus takes it even further. He says, "And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well."
Back then, a shirt was an undergarment, and a coat was a person's most valuable possession. It doubled as a blanket. By offering both, you're not just going above and beyond. You're making a bold statement of generosity and trust in God.
And then there's the next line. "If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles.
This references a Roman law that allowed soldiers to force civilians to carry their gear for a mile. It was a hated practice, but Jesus flips it into an opportunity to show unexpected kindness.
Exactly. By going the extra mile, you're reclaiming the situation, refusing to respond with bitterness, and showing a higher standard of love.
Finally, Jesus says, "Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you."
This wraps it all up. Jesus calls us to live open-handed lives, willing to give generously, even to those who might not deserve it.
So what's the big takeaway here?
It's about breaking free from the mindset of retaliation and stepping into a life of grace and love. Jesus isn't saying we ignore justice. He's saying we trust God with ultimate justice and focus on responding with compassion.
And this isn't easy. It takes humility, strength, and a deep dependence on God to live this way. But when we do, we reflect God's character in a world that often values payback over peace.
So how can we live this out practically?
It starts with our mindset. When someone wrongs us, instead of immediately thinking about how to get even, we can pause and ask, how can I respond in a way that honors God and shows His love?
And it continues with small, everyday acts of grace. Whether it's letting go of a grudge, going out of your way to help someone, or being generous when it's inconvenient, these choices add up to a life that stands out for God's kingdom.
Listeners, here's something to reflect on. Is there someone in your life you need to forgive or show unexpected kindness to? How can you take a step this week to break the cycle of retaliation and live with radical grace?
We'd love to hear your thoughts or stories. And next time, we'll dive into Jesus' teaching on loving your enemies. A perfect follow-up to this passage.
Thanks for tuning in to Faithful Chats. Until next time, let's strive to live lives of grace, generosity, and love that reflect God's heart to the world. As we wrap up today's episode, we want to remind you that we don't shy away from difficult topics just like the Bible. We believe tackling challenging subjects head-on is important, because that's how we grow and learn together.
However, we know that sometimes these kinds of conversations don't exactly help with the algorithms. So if you found today's episode valuable, we'd love for you to share it with friends, Christian or otherwise. Help us spread these important messages far and wide.
If you'd like to support the creation of these episodes and help us continue diving into tough but essential topics, consider becoming a patron or grabbing some merch. All the information is below. Your support makes all the difference.
Thank you for listening. And until next time, keep growing in faith, truth, and love.